Hi, and welcome back to the Life in Bomb City podcast. I'm Aaron Favor.
And I'm Dr. Beth Rodriguez.
And we're here recording live here in the Panhandle PBS FM 90 studios on the Amarillo College campus. Always invading their space, at least trying to on a Friday morning.
Yeah.
We certainly have a lot to talk about today. We both work in the Social and Behavioral Sciences Department. I should say that we don't speak for the Social and Behavioral Sciences Department.
Right.
But we work in that office. So absolutely love to do that, by the way.
Yes,
love our
we
colleagues.
do. Okay, today we're going to talk a little bit about what it was brought to our attention and we forgot, which is kind of a funny situation, that this was part of an everyday situation. I said situation 10 times, but it is a situation. We're going to talk about campus carry. And a lot of people don't even know or are terrified about this whole idea. And we're going to talk about our feelings about how it's kind of like a non-issue with us.
Sure.
But it was brought to our attention because we have both Aaron and I were lucky enough to be part of another, I would say colleague now, his dissertation, but he's in Illinois. And he brought up the idea of talking about sensitive subjects, which Aaron and I do in our classes, and the idea that students are now allowed to carry on campus. And what was really shocking to me was like, whoa, you know what? I have never even thought about that. So he did bring up something that I hadn't even thought about. So the first thing that we want to do is kind of talk about what the rules are for here on our campus. Aaron, do you have that on there? What is expected from us?
I sure do, yes. So right here, the procedures and responsibilities is that our college president established this rule consulting with Amarillo College students, staff, and faculty about the nature of the student population, specifically safety considerations and the uniqueness of the campus environment. The Board of Regents, as required by law, reviewed those rules. And then a handgun license holder under Chapter 411, Texas Government Code, may carry a concealed handgun on or about the license holder's person while the license holder is on campus of Amarillo College or in any Amarillo College vehicle unless prohibited by state or federal law or this rule. And we're in Texas, so the open carrying of a handgun on campus is prohibited. So not open carry, it's concealed carry. Licensed peace officers are authorized by law to carry firearms at all times, of course. And then we enforce that state law regulating firearms on campus. The enforcement occurs in two ways, and I think that I've gone probably a little bit too far here, but that's okay. I think that's kind of the point, is establishes that there is in fact a procedure and a policy, and that the end of it is that we have state law, federal law, and then we have the institutional law. Mm-hmm. So state law would say that a license holder is responsible for complying with the applicable state law prohibitions. And then the federal law is that a license holder is responsible for complying with the applicable federal law prohibitions. What those prohibitions are not necessarily what we're going to be discussing today. It is part of our conversation. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, there's the other prohibited campus things. And we could talk about those in more detail. But really, because we're classroom teachers, we interface with our colleague in Illinois in this way. And it's just a different culture.
Yeah. One of the things, I was on the board that was really kind of trying to come up with the, specific rules for our campus for campus carry. And at the time I was shocked that they asked me, but I was really glad because the more we talked about it, and people kept adding more and more and more places. And I really had to stop everybody and say, wait a minute. The more places that we're not allowed to carry, the less places that we're going to have people who carry. Most people see that as, yes, it's exactly what we want to do. And I was like, but wait a minute. What happens here is if we have those laws, we have law-abiding citizens who will respect those rules. But those law-abiding citizens are usually not the ones who are doing the school shootings. So what would happen is the more and more laws that we kept putting in place, the less and less places people who have their license to carry will have a gun. And I know this is kind of probably controversial to some people, but the truth is the people who break the law don't care about the laws. So we should actually make it less restrictive of the places where you can actually carry. And I was all about some of the places that we said, of course, are the kids, where the kids are. Mm-hmm. I think that makes a lot of sense. Not that no one needs to protect the kids.
Kids would be people 18 and under.
Yes.
Right?
So
Okay.
I mean, and like kids too is what we have.
Sometimes I call
I
kids,
call everybody kids. Yeah.
I mean,
But like at the daycares, we have two different daycares that are considered, AC campuses. One is on the West Campus, and the other one is at Meddy Park. And so those are two places that you're not allowed to carry. And then, of course, any of the like gymnastics places where they have dance and gymnastics and with lots of kids. And then, of course, they did say the Carter Fitness Center. And I think one is not necessarily, I just don't, people are not caring while they're working out, hopefully. I mean, that's kind of that would be a stretch. That would be hard, actually.
It would be very difficult. I know some people that probay pull it off, and I'm sure you do too.
I do too.
But I mean, depending on the day, figure out,
And then, but if they bring it to Carter Fitness, they would have to put it in a locker, which then would allow someone to go, and it's kind of like, okay, so let's just not bring it there. Right, because there's a lot of logistics. And that's kind of what we came down to is like, let's think of the places that would be, I wouldn't want there to be a gun there. And that's kind of what we went with. It was a huge list. We made it smaller because that's kind of what happened is the people who are going to follow the laws are not the people who are going to be breaking them anyways. Does that make sense? So it didn't make sense to have all those laws.
No, it does make sense. And of course, it breaks down into the different type of criminal activity that might be involved, violent crimes, as to whether or not somebody, we get into all the logistics and the details of what motive is and whether people, But I think what Beth is pointing out is that when folks tend to go out and commit violent criminal acts on campuses, they're normally breaking the law before they even step onto that campus because they're in violation of some type of a gun ownership law or prohibition that has been established by the state or the federal government in the purchasing, or normally it's a theft of some sort. And there's also very regularly some other type of criminal activity that's happened prior to that campus event. And of course, this is very sensitive stuff. We're very sensitive to the fact that it's sensitive. And when we talk about it in our classes, we do so with great reverence for life and dignity of life. But by the same token, we also want to emphasize the dignity of the individual, which is it's a fundamental tenet of American republicanism. And I don't say republicanism as the party, but republicanism the principle, right? So republicanism, underlying tenets of our Constitution are individual liberty and dignity. So if you're going to respect the dignity of a human life and respect the liberty of a human life, then these things can get rather complex very quickly, as all of our topics do, by the way.
Yeah, they do. But that's what makes it good, is that I think that, these are things that we need to talk about. And it's not, and I don't know that it needs to be either or, right? On a lot of these issues, I think that, we just need to understand both sides. And I think that's really where it's coming from. It's like, there's a lot of people who are, want to make more gun laws. And I understand. I mean, when I see school shootings, it terrifies me, right? You send your kids to school, you drop them off at school, and like sometimes you have a little anxiety because they're not in the building yet. They get in the building and you're like, they're safe. Okay, but then when we start to see all these school shootings, do you really feel like they're safe there? And I think that's where we see, people are like, oh, we need more guns. We need less guns. We need more rules, more laws, more everything so we can keep people safe. And I think it gets to the point where if we have so much that, so many laws, so much that we're taking away from people, it actually leaves people more vulnerable than safe. And our kids are already vulnerable if you look at it. And it's a double-edged sword, right? I definitely want the campuses to be safe. Like, that is terrifying. School.
I think that one of the big things that people want to know is, do you feel unsafe, or do you feel threatened in any way if you know that students can carry a firearm on campus in a concealed manner, which is the legal way to carry on our campus?
Mm-hmm. I know. And I don't. I actually, that colleague of ours, I don't know if can we say his name? I don't know.
I don't know.
We didn't ask him.
I'm not because I didn't ask him.
Yeah, we didn't ask him. But he actually asked this question because we're going to be back face to face starting in the fall. And he asked, are you more scared of COVID or campus carry? And I kind of, looked and I said, neither. And he was floored. I don't know. The fact that I have students in the class that have, can conceal carry, I don't really think about it. So I guess it's not something that makes me nervous, that I'm worried about.
Right. And one of the biggest issues that he seems to be bringing up, and is something that I think a lot of folks are concerned about, is whether or not, for example, last episode we visited a little bit about anti-racism. Mm-hmm. We visited about it in a lot of different ways. I hope that we were able to respectfully diagnose the different positions on it. Of course, that's a fairly superficial argument when we really start getting into visiting with people that have they spent their life studying this stuff. But at the same time, we're doing the same thing with this issue, mm-hmm. right? So having students for 8 weeks at a time in class, even if we meet 4 days a week, we know relatively little about them. Mm-hmm. When they walk in, we get to know them. This is our first interaction, unless we know them outside of class, or we had them in a previous class, which is not uncommon, but it's also regular for me to not know anybody. Mm-hmm. So we do all kinds of things, and eventually I start to get an idea of their personalities and things like that, establish a baseline. Mm-hmm. And the idea doesn't not cross my mind. In fact, when that question got asked, I was kind of jarred a little bit because it's not something that I really think about at all.
Yeah, me neither. And I think that, with people who have concealed, I'm assuming if it's concealed and they're doing everything they're supposed to, then they aren't a threat to me. I think that the reason why it's not is because we do establish a kind of a safe environment, respect, agree to disagree on the very first day. I mean, that is part of my syllabus is I say, listen, we're going to talk about things that people have very strong opinions about. It's psychology. It's personal. Okay. And so when we do that, I need everybody to respect everybody else. And I think that establishing that kind of environment where, we're going to disagree. It's not, that's not something that I'm not saying you can't be emotional and you can't have your passion about it, but at the same time, you have to respect the other person. And I think that just establishing that idea in the very beginning doesn't really, I'm sure people still get in arguments sometimes, but it kind of sets the base like, okay, you know what? Like you can't throw a fit. And that's what I would see as if somebody decided, oh, we're talking about something sensitive, and I got mad, so I'm going to use my gun. And I respect my students enough, and I think they respect me enough that they understand that that's kind of the environment we're setting. And I just don't see it happening in the classroom. And I don't know if that's naive or if that is just because I assume that these people are, they're responsible, they're respectful, and they're adult enough to understand that this argument is not worth taking someone's life.
Right. I remember visiting the Northeast coast, and I remember getting into a conversation with someone about gun control. Specifically, it was Boston. He wanted to know, and I mean, I'm not going to try to do the accent, but he certainly said, and he grew up in Boston, understand. He grew up in downtown Boston. He was a cosmopolitan, personality, spent his entire life there. And this is a place where even the nomenclature is different that they use to express, firearms and Second Amendment issues. So one of the things that he asked me was, what's the deal? I told him I was from Texas, and he goes, oh, yeah. He goes, what's the deal with you guys and guns? Mm-hmm. Is that mindset right there, what's the deal with you guys and guns? That kind of shows a cultural rift or a chasm in between in our not only political discourse, but our political culture and our personal life culture. In Texas and the Panhandle, particularly because of the wide open spaces, the relatively new time that we've been on the not a frontier community. Some people would still say we're a frontier community,
really?
Myself being one of them, by the way. But it's just kind of our mindset.
Yeah.
And that has to do with, I'm not looking for, I respect, I love police officers. I'm so glad they're here. I believe that they're here to protect people. I believe that they're here to establish a baseline for walking the boundaries. And that thin blue line that we talk about is very real. Mm-hmm. And that they serve the absolute interest of the community. But oftentimes when I get into a conversation with a police officer about this topic, they'll say that they support and hope that the individual that is having to deal with a violent confrontation there at their home or anywhere else where they may have to defend their lives or someone else's lives, our families, mm-hmm. They hope they have a firearm. They want them to have the tools that they need there so that knowing that the chances they're going to get there and the likelihood they're going to get there prior to something happening. And of course, every situation is different.
Sure.
And not, putting anything is, even in the event that it's a distant possibility, they still want them to have the tools because life is life. The dignity of that human individual and their individual life and their personal liberty isn't worth waiting 3 minutes or 2 minutes or 1 minute or even 30 seconds when they need to have it in a split second.
Right. So we had this conversation in our offices the other day, but I actually had a cop friend. He's not from here, which is really funny that I'm saying this now, but he moved here. And when we were talking about this, he said, I would rather you, talking to me, have your son's baseball bat. And, because you're more likely going to hit the person with the baseball bat than you are going to shoot him because, you're not trained, you're not practiced, you're not, so you would probably freeze. But as soon as you pull your gun, if this person is there to do harm, they're not going to freeze. But if you have a bat, you're more likely going to hit because it's not because I understand the idea. Like if I shoot this person, they're going to die. And that's a intense idea. Now, if I had been practicing and I did this over and over, maybe. And of course, I want to, protect my kids. But he was saying just because you don't do this on a regular basis, I would not want you to hesitate. I would rather you get that bat and sneak up behind him and hit him in the head.
Right.
And then we were talking and, of course, as soon as I said that, everybody's like, nope, that's too close. If you can hit him with the bat, that person with the gun's too close. And that does play a huge part too. And it's a situation. If you're in it, it's terrifying. But if you had the possibility of protecting your family, then that makes sense. Okay. Even here on campus, right? we had an active shooter training because, all of the different shooters on campus. And when we had it,
The types of shooters?
Yeah.
Okay.
Exactly. And we had the training, and as soon as we had it, it was like, oh, what are you going to do? What are you going to do if it happens? And, just instinct, I would, the first thing they always say is to run, get out. If you are in a clear, you get out. Okay. But if you're not, and they're in your building, then you be ready to fight.
Mm-hmm. And I believe that the phrase is run, hide, fight. Sometimes that's just, it's a direct line to fight, depending on where people are in the building. If you can hear things. I mean, this is, by the way, I got to tell y'all, I have an absolute, I know it's absolutely necessary for us to think about this, and to kind of imagine what we would do, what would you do in this situation. It's important to be thinking about that stuff because I guess it plays an important role psychologically to be prepared for events. It doesn't do any good to just sit around and just say, well, if we could just do this, and it was a complaint about policy, But in our own minds, in our own constitutions, we have to have a standard of preparation as well, a policy in place that we can go to when we are having some type of a threat. That way we can be evaluating our decisions based on something we've already thought about a little bit. And of course, in real life, I can't imagine how scary that would actually be in a real situation.
But you can. You were there. You were in something, weren't you?
I was in we had somewhat of a real type of situation in my previous job, and it was one of those that felt real. It was as real as it could possibly get. Turned out to not be as threatening as we thought, but it was a situation where we didn't really feel like we were training in the moment. We didn't find out until much later that the threat wasn't what we thought it was, and that went from the top down. Mm-hmm. So we were ready.
Yeah,
I mean, we were ready, and my students were ready, and we had broken down our students into those that wanted to hide and wanted to fight. And it was, once again, a nightmare scenario when you're responsible for the lives of all these people that have no way of defending themselves outside of their hands and any tool that they might have.
Yeah,
and it gets more and more gruesome, when you start thinking about it in those terms. But in some ways, our culture prepares them for that, and that's probably under fire to some degree.
Sure.
Like shows like The Walking Dead.
Yeah.
There's, by the way, now a dated show.
Yeah.
Another thing to date me, right?
Yeah.
Gonna be 41 in August, but
I don't want to talk about mine.
Man, it's okay. It's a level.
What's the? Oh gosh, I can't think of it now. Where the guys were they in Paris? Mm-hmm. And they saved everybody. Where are they from?
Oh, are you talking about? Wait, are you talking about the airplane? Or are you
I'm talking about the subway train or whatever they were on.
Oh man. Oh, I remember what you're talking about.
Yes.
Was that Paris?
Was it?
I know what you're talking about. Where they saw it and immediately did something about it. They just confronted it. Where they didn't happen to be U.S. Marines, did they?
Mm-hmm. I believe so.
It doesn't surprise me at all. Not one single bit. If they happen to be United States Marine Corps.
And I have to look because I need to know. But we can keep talking and then I'll fill you in when I get it.
Yeah, that's great. So the court debate tends to go on in a multitude of ways. This is no simple thing. And of course, among judges and judicial philosophies, it's no simple thing either. It seems to gravitate towards a similar grounds as what we were talking about when we talked about anti-racism, which is an individual versus a collective. So when we talked about defining racism in our space, whether or not somebody's looking at racism as something that's done individually or whether it's done at a societal level, is something that also people talk about when they talk about the Second Amendment. Is this an individual right? The Second Amendment reads, a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. And the question is, does it apply to a group of people, or does it apply to one person to keep and bear arms? Beth, did you find it?
I did. Okay, so it is, of course it doesn't say what, but it's 1517 to Paris. Okay. And there was, which is so funny, it's Anthony Sadler was one of them. That's my maiden name. And it's my sister's name, just Anthony, but she spells it with an I.
Yeah. Dr. Sadler from Jurassic Park.
Yeah, I know. I always said, hey, that's me. And that's why I got my doctorate. No, I'm just kidding. It was done by Clint Eastwood, though. 3 American Heroes is what it was. And I'm trying to, for some reason, I think that they may be from Texas. And I can't, I need to know just because
Right.
To kind of play into what we're talking about.
No, it's important to understand. I think maybe the culture that people come from dictates their behavior in those types of situations. It's what they have to fall back on. It's what they're used to. And so if you're used to seeing people with guns all the time and you see somebody in a threatened position, it's different than seeing someone just with a gun in their holster or concealed.
He was United States Air Force Staff Sergeant. Where were they from? I'm sorry, you guys. I want to know because, no, it's not from Texas.
Oh, darn it.
Well, never mind.
We want him to be from Texas.
I did. Well,
he's an honorary Texan if he stopped an attack.
Especially,
extend the border there for him and loop him in. He's in fact from California?
Yes.
Okay. Well, we like California. They know how to party.
They do. Well, but the point is it is the military, right? So when you're in the environment where guns are, something that you understand, right, and where people can have, respect and they're using it correctly, then you're cool, right? You see the gun. But if you recognize when it's being used as a tool against people, you also are able to identify that and be less terrified and ready to act because it's part of your culture, the way that you do things. And I think that's kind of what we're talking about. Because, here, I'm willing to bet that there is a lot of people who, if we were to poll people on the street, they have shot a gun. Now, not necessarily at people, right? They not necessarily hunting, but just shot a gun. And I'm willing to bet that the number in Texas, especially in the Texas Panhandle, is a lot higher than, a lot of other places. And I think because of that, we do have a more, not necessarily laxed attitude about guns, but we have more of we're not terrified. And I think that really plays a part into how we function with the idea of campus carry.
Certainly. And in addition to that, I think it's hard to put this in words, like so many things are. For me, I am always searching for words, and I use the word and trying to fill in those gaps while I'm trying to figure it out. The truth is that nobody really knows. You can be terrified and still know how to act, and that's. Sure. I think that's where training really comes in, and I have not been trained in the way that some of the folks that probably listen to this podcast have.
Right.
I have not had that extensive training that where you're actually under fire, the training of reality, that prepares you for a whole thing, a list of issues in real life. And so many of our veterans serving overseas, when they hear things, they not only are able to recognize the type of gun that is being fired, but they're able to determine how far away it is and a variety of other things and what they need to do. That all plays into experience around something. So maybe that happens, in Texas. Maybe that happens in Afghanistan. Maybe that happens in any other variety of places all over the world. But in my mind, when I think of being terrified in a situation, I always think, well, you can be terrified and still be able to think. Are we paralyzed when in these situations? And of course, we're kind of talking out of our hat here a little bit. And so anyway, that being said, I kind of want to keep it, if we can, keep it on the point of less hypothetical and much more how do we deal with the fact that we're all constantly going into these different situations and are so open to going into them and crossing over that border and thinking about what we would do in these situations is more than some other people would do.
Right.
And they're comfortable with even, but I want to have thought about it.
Right. And when it comes to something like that, your sympathetic nervous system kicks in. And that is the automatic system of fight or flight that we know of. In a stressful situation, your body reacts immediately, automatically. And some of the things that happen, like your pupils don't dilate. That's constrict. They dilate, right? So they get let in more light so you can see more things. Okay, your body also releases glucose that's stored. That's sugar. It gives you energy to do something. Right? Your heart starts beating faster. Your adrenal gland is going off. Okay, all of these things that are happening to your body prepare you. You can either run or you're fighting. And that's really what it does. And it does happen automatically. Now, when we say things happen automatically, sometimes you don't get to think. Sometimes it is training that if you've trained over and over and in those stressful situations, you do have training and experience, it's not as stressful. So your sympathetic nervous system doesn't have as much control. Does that make sense?
It does.
It's like the training allows for you to, yes, your body's still reacting because it's not going to not react because that's just this natural way. But you're able to not necessarily just give into it because you've been here before. The stress is not as big, even though it is very big. And so therefore, you're able to think. So I think that what you're saying is just coming up with a plan. Coming up with what you could do in that situation is what you have to do, because then you will be able to think because you already have a plan. And it's kind of like it's automatic. If you think about it enough, it is also in that sympathetic where you will automatically know exactly what you're going to do. And I'll tell you, that's really what the campus cops would tell you they want you to do. That's why they want to do the training, and they want to do it more than once, and they want to keep doing it because that way you, as the person who's going to be in the classroom, will know what you're going to do. Because even though they're here, and our campus isn't huge or anything, but it's still going to take time for them to get to you. So you have to have something. You got to be doing something. And even though there are some students who are older or the same age as I am, I do feel like they're my kids, and I have to my job is not only, to teach them, but it's also to keep them safe.
Well, we're responsible for them. When we say safe learning environment, we don't just mean it, rhetorically, and we don't mean it, in an abstract way and making sure people's feelings feel, they're safe in their feelings and how they express things, but rather physically safe. That includes, if somebody's sharing a sensitive topic like their position on racism or their position or their experience with racism, that they don't feel physically threatened.
Right.
On the other hand, there's this really delicate balance between what personal liberties allow, particularly at the legal standard, not only within our community but within our state and under federal law by the Second Amendment. That is a hard line. It's a hard wall, right? It does not apply in those situations, meaning that someone with a concealed firearms permit and just a carry permit but is concealing on campus, which is, I believe, the legal way to carry on our campus. And that right there is a sticky wicket for us.
Yeah.
There's nothing that I just don't think about that. I don't think about it. It's not something that ever crosses my mind. And I'll be curious whenever we get back into classrooms, whether or not it's something I'll start thinking about. but I don't think so.
Maybe. I don't
think
know.
so, Tim. Do you remember that?
Yeah.
I just don't think that it's something I'm just too comfortable around firearms and seeing people with them.
Okay, so I'm going to give you this. I know that you were like, let's stay away from scenarios, but let's say, because I was asked this question. Okay, let's say that someone comes in with a gun and they decide to take it out and put it on the table in the classroom, right? How would you respond to that? Like, do you feel threatened now, or is it something that you would notice, or would you just kind of be like, oh, yep, there's a gun?
I love that question, Beth. It's, once again, I try to stay away from some of this stuff unless it's like, this is one of those issues where, should we talk about this just in our office? Should we talk about this, privately, or is this a public, something that needs to, well, I think that to some extent, maybe, once again, we do not speak for our department.
Right.
or for the school. But in that scenario, I actually don't feel threatened. I actually don't. Not by the gun. Not by the gun. It's going to always be the behavior of the person with it. And I don't mean, look, I'm not saying that if somebody pulled out a bazooka, I wouldn't say something. I would definitely say something. And of course, they would be in violation of our campus carry policy if they did something like that. And so, of course, I would say something. But would I feel physically threatened? Would I feel a need to, everybody out of the classroom? Would I do that? Yes. Would I feel threatened by it? It depends on the person that had done it and their behavior, the way that they looked, their gait, the look on their face, or my prior experience with them, the way that they were talking, their behavior that day.
What had happened maybe even the day before.
What happened the day before, maybe. But it's always the intangible things that we don't know. We don't know what we don't know, who people are, where they come from, like all those little things, what their life experiences have been, that are always hiding underneath the ocean of our personality and our life being, but whatever. But okay, so same scenario, Beth. How about you?
Okay, so it would be the individual. It would be how the individual responded with doing that. Now, if it was like they put the gun on the table and kind of had attitude, then I would be like, okay, something's going on here and no one's safe. And I would have everybody go, and then I would probably stay and be like, hey, what's up? And again, that my husband would kill me for saying that. Like, he would be like, you need to get out. But the thing is, again, I have this, and it's probably, I don't know that it's good, but I have this abstract sense that people do respect people and that they're not there to really hurt people all the time. So if I can get everybody else out, I feel like that I could address this person and be like, hey, do you need something? Because this is not a normal behavior. And it has to do with the psychologist in me as well. But I would not feel like they're personally threatening me, but I also would not feel safe for my students. So I'd probably dismiss the class and then address the student and be like, hey, what's going on? Now, if they were mad and in a bad mood, and because you can see it in their faces, and even if they're whatever, whatever's going on with that individual, if they looked aggressive, if they looked like something was going on, then I would probably leave too. I would be like, I'll give you a minute and leave, and probably call the campus cops and get them in there, just because there's something going on outside of what I can deal with. But if the person just put it up there because, I don't know, they were sitting weird, sometimes if you have campus care or concealed, it's sitting weird. So they put it up there I might be like, and if the person's like talking and doing, I would be like, I'd probably walk over and say, hey, that needs to be concealed, and they'd be like, oh my gosh. And that's what I would expect.
Their backpack or something, whatever.
Right. But if I would, it would be all about the body language and the, facial expression, everything about the individual at that moment that would have me respond different. But it's not the gun that's the problem. It would be the individual. Right. That's
the major policy divide right there. Is the question. Or it seems like it is anyway. Unless there's something else going on that I'm not aware of. Seems like there's a heavy reliance on the susceptibility of people that don't carry firearms being threatened by people that choose to carry firearms legally and constitutionally. That's not by the way, not a plug for constitutional carry. It's just a different, right? But by the Constitution, by the standards of the Second Amendment itself, being threatened by a potential or something that's physical on their person, rather than by the behavior, and also not maybe knowing the statistical probabilities of certain things as well.
I just, we actually had this other conversation about, like mass shootings, and somebody had brought up that there's more mass shootings by white people than any other group. And it brought up the idea that, okay, so these white people who are doing these mass shootings, are they following the laws in the first place? And the answer is probably going to be no on most of them. Granted, there may be some who have lived their life perfectly, everything's fantastic, and then they just click. Okay, but if we look at the number of the different races, like the actual number, and then look at the percentages, I bet the percentages are a lot closer than what we would say. But I don't know. If somebody knows it, let us know. But that's the idea. Is like, I don't know that. I think the biggest percentage that we're going to see for school shootings, mass shootings, are going to be people who are not following the law in the first place.
Adam Lanza, perspective here. Adam Lanza, the Sandy Hook killer, the murderer,
yes,
went into that elementary school and killed all those little kids.
That is, ugh.
This makes my heart sink. Just the idea of it just makes my heart sink. It's unbelievable crime. Adam Lanza had killed his mom and taken her firearm, and then went out and perpetrated that crime. Is that the way it is with all of these crimes? No, it's not. There are cases in which someone went and legally purchased one, but the first thing that they went out and did was, oh, wait a minute, hold on. There have been cases where that's happened, and this goes back to the 90s, not just Columbine, but before that even, we had all these postal shootings, post office shootings, that were going on. Do you remember that in the early 90s?
Yes.
It began in the late 80s.
It was like everybody, what was the new term? We're going to go postal.
That's right.
Because that happened.
Right. And of course, that gets, there's a joke on Seinfeld, which is not funny maybe, but also is satire. They said, why is that? And of course, Newman on Seinfeld is a postal carrier and says, because the mail never stops, Jerry.
Yeah.
It just keeps coming and coming.
Okay, so I looked at percentages, and it doesn't break it down in percentages, just so you know. But I'm going to first let you know the distribution of population in the United States for races. And non-Hispanic white is at about 61.3%.
That's Hispanic. Hispanic.
That's
white.
White. Non-Hispanic.
The percentage though is for
white.
For white, but
population in the United States. No, this is just the population.
Oh, just the population itself in the United States.
The highest population in the United States is white, 62%. Well, 61.
Okay.
And then next is Hispanic, and it's almost 18%. Okay. So
not in Texas. In Texas, it is.
Not.
I think this upcoming year, it's set to eclipse, I believe, and become the majority.
Yeah. So, but then it has it broken down in the number of incidents by races, and there's 66 by white. Okay, but I don't know, considering the percentage of how many white people there are, the race of white, what percentage is that compared to where we see for black, it's 21 incidences, Latino is 10, Asian is 8. 5 is other. I don't know what other is.
Do we describe mass shootings in this situation, or mass death, like in this situation, as people like moving into a house and shooting up a party? Is that something that is included here, or is it have to be something? Do we only break it up down into school shootings?
No, this is mass shooting of anything, not just school.
By the way, social science itself is meant. I think one of the things that we do is we have to look at statistics, but we have to look at them within perspective. If we're going to get a correct evaluation of the material. If I have a lot of students failing my class, I don't just look at the statistics of the number failing. I look at the context that's surrounding it. Why are they failing? How is this compared to other classes? What am I doing differently in other classes? What is the state of Illinois doing? Mm-hmm. They've cracked down on guns, right? I mean, where is the largest concentration of death by firearm in a city? Chicago.
Yeah.
And you know what? I feel for Chicago.
I do.
I do, deeply. I want them to get that under control. And what is it that they haven't tried?
Yeah, what is it that's different with other places? Because there's in Texas where, everything's growing. Austin is huge. Houston is huge. Do we have shootings there? Absolutely. That would be ridiculous not to say that we do. But is it at the extent that we're seeing it in other places, especially with loss of gun control? Like this is going to be very Texas of me. But what is the one thing that's going to make it less likely that you're going to pull out a gun and start shooting? Someone's going to shoot you if you do. Right? The point of you getting a gun is not to be killed. You're going to kill somebody. But if you know that the average Joe who's standing here, when you pull your gun, he might have one, does that deter? Would that deter? I don't know, because that's not how it is. So maybe that's why. I don't know what it is. Mm-hmm. Like you don't see the same kind of actions happening. Now, at schools, it's not even fair. Especially the young kids, because they're not carrying. No. Now, if we had teachers, right? If we had teachers, right? Isn't that like the movement? It's like, let your teacher carry, because then it's just one of those, you don't know now. Like if I go to the school where I'm supposed to have soft targets, am I going to get shot before the cops get there? Because if I walk in, does the principal have a gun? Yeah. If I have a gun, does that principal have a gun? As soon as they see my gun, they shoot. Mm-hmm. I don't know. Mm-hmm. But at that point, when someone decides to go into a school and shoot, are they mentally sound? Are they thinking even at that point? You know what I mean? Are they looking at the consequences?
Right. And this is kind of a shameless plug, by the way, for a future episode, I think, that we want to do, breaking down the mindsets and the way that people think about who are conservative and people who tend to be more liberal in their approaches, the way they think, those different ideological frameworks. And I think that that's very relevant to our situation here and what you're mentioning, because you're talking about compellence. What is it that compels another person or another actor to do something differently? Is it deterrence, or is it something else? Well, let's look at the behavior of the individuals. Are they attacking hard targets? Are they attacking soft targets?
Right.
They tend to attack soft targets. Mm-hmm. So you harden those targets up. You harden those facilities up. And I recognize that this is not something that a lot of people all over the country may agree with, but when you talk to maybe security experts, they would say that makes more sense. Guns, more guards, more police.
And it's so funny because I don't know if it's funny, but during the whole thing when we had a string of the school shootings, and I'm constantly looking at all sorts of statistics, and we had a lot of unemployed vets. I was like, oh my gosh, why would we not have veterans be some sort of, not necessarily guards, but some sort of, policing at the schools that we're all worried about? And then all of a sudden we're like killing two birds with one stone, right? We are giving jobs and we are protecting. But again, I don't want also our schools to be.
There's legislators that really want to use that as a job creation program.
Yeah.
I mean, it's real. They're looking for funding, not just in the state of Texas, but all over the country in different state legislatures.
Kind of makes sense, right? Because we, I know that they have increased the police presence on the campuses for middle school and high school, but we don't have enough cops.
Right.
And because of that, why this would be a perfect job. But at the same time, like I was saying, I don't want my kid to go to school and feel like they are in some sort of like prison or heavily guarded. I want them to also feel safe, both physically and mentally safe. And, having fences and gates, and you don't feel safe.
Okay. Another argument that someone from the other side of that aisle would certainly bring up in this case is, what do you do whenever you have a victim of gun violence that is truly terrified every time they see a gun, they've seen the impact of what it does, they've seen the aftermath, they've seen the blood, they've seen the gunpowder, they've smelled it, all those different things that come into the reality of a crime like that. I mean, what do you say to somebody like that when we're hardening targets up? That's a natural counter argument is, well, you've got victims that are in that same school, that are in that same environment, and it could certainly make them more emotional or I don't know the words here. Instigate
PTSD,
trigger
right?
trauma, right? Trigger trauma responses. Is that? I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And yes, and it's going to. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised, but again, this is a situational thing, and everybody's going to react different. And I can't, and when we're looking, and this, like with policy, with law, we're looking for the greater good. And not that I don't want everybody to feel safe, but at the same time, what is the thing that's going to make more people feel safe, in that situation? And yes, I definitely do take into account the people who have suffered and are victims, because it's, that's kind of what my job is as a psychologist. But at the same time, it's like, well, that's something that needs to be addressed anyways. And now we don't want everybody else to be a victim either. Certainly. And so
individual, collective.
Yes.
Always goes back to individual, collective. In that framework, you're going to see people on the right say collective.
Right.
But they're also going to say individual, because, on the left, they would say that, that individual deserves special status, deserves to be protected. Totally understandable, right? They do. Mm-hmm. But they also are choosing to go to a public place, in a public space where they're... Now, how do you make that place safe emotionally? It's going to be different from the way you make it safe physically.
Right.
That's two totally different things. We're psychologists. I mean, at some point you break it down. We talked to For Price on this show, Congressman Price, very, very, very well-respected representative in our Texas legislature, who is constantly such a advocate for health, mental health, and the different types of ways that we can serve that community of individuals that need that as individuals and as a community in those spaces, and make them feel safer and make them feel not only welcome, but like they've got a place to go if they need. But in that situation, we also are looking out for the larger group of people as well, not to break down to utilitarianism. That's not my point. But certainly to just look at the purpose behind the Second Amendment itself. The Second Amendment would suggest a well-regulated militia. Sorry, I'm just going to have to kind of pull this out of my hat. But well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. So there's a lot there, right? I mean, that if they hadn't put all those commas in there, we may not be in some of the questioning that we are now, but they did.
Right. And I think that was brilliant. on their part, because they have to know that things are going to change and things are different. And so, by doing that, they allow for some flexibility and, understanding that, it's going to change, but not that much,
Right. I mean, what is a free state?
Point, right?
In that amendment, the language, what is a free state? Well, a free state is, at that time, 1787, coming out of the Articles of Confederation, trying to find support and consensus. That's the states, the individual state legislatures saying that they want to have the right to defend themselves if necessary against a larger, more powerful central government. Now, that gets misconstrued today as being something like the Timothy McVeigh way of thinking, which is that the federal government's out to get people, and therefore people need to be armed, ready to defend themselves. Well, I mean, to some extent that might be correct. Not necessarily in the sense that it's like an impending threat, but maybe the purpose of the amendment itself was to not only protect the state itself, but also the individual within that state. And this was the big case, DC v. Heller, where there was a gun ban in the District of Columbia, and Heller was a federal agent. He worked in DC and was able to carry a firearm in his job, but was not allowed to defend his home with the same firearm, and he wanted that right. Challenged it. There were actually a group of people that challenged it. His was the only one that held up in the District of Columbia as being something that was viable. It was, I believe it was an NRA-backed case. But there was another case, and they, by the way, that opinion, there were two dissents in that. I believe it was Stevens and Breyer on the Supreme Court in that case, and then Justice Scalia wrote the opinion, the majority opinion on the. If you ever want to read some of the history of the Second Amendment, read Scalia's opinion on that case. It's a long opinion, but it's very, very good. And also the way that they break down, read the dissents. I mean, if you want to see the arguments and counter arguments of this, and then apply it to what Beth and I are talking about today, read those dissents. This was taken as something that only applied to District of Columbia at that particular time, because District of Columbia is not a state, which is, I understand as a movement, but it's just not. It was never intended to be. Whether or not we choose to do it now, that'll be up to us in the future. We'll see where that goes. But the question then became, well, what about states themselves? Can states legislate? By your logic, Aaron, and by the logic that you're stating, or you're relating that Supreme Court justices have said, based on the Second Amendment, if that's true, then the state legislatures should be able to have like almost unlimited authority about what their people do in those types of situations. Well, we get, the McDonald case in Chicago, where we understand that there are certain things that we can and can't do. And I would bring us back home and say, look at abortion. I know we're getting ready to be done, but looking at abortion itself. So that's another controversial case, maybe for a different day, but it relates to this in the sense that, we tend to look at things and we see what we want to see. And the complexity of this landscape is such that what we're really looking at is power and layers of power. And so federalism, where the federal government shares powers with the states, at what point do they have the right to say something and not say something, or enforce something and not enforce something? Is it about integrating schools? Well, I mean, there are people that would argue, the states shouldn't have had the authority to discriminate at the level they did, and therefore the federal government was justified in going in and enforcing the Civil Rights Act of 1964, enforcing integration of schools, enforcing all those different the different titles that created, and also the Supreme Court decisions, Brown v. Board of Education, things of that nature. By the same token, things like the Griswold v. Connecticut case, Roe v. Wade, where states were discriminating against specific groups of individuals, married couples in Connecticut, individuals that wanted to have abortions in Texas. That is a leftist argument that the state shouldn't be in control. So it's interesting. I mean, it depends on if you break down whether if you're somebody that believes that women should have the freedom to choose, you're going to believe that the federal government should be saying this, but only because the federal government wants to do something, or they believe the Supreme Court has the power to enforce that. This is a whole other issue in government,
yes.
which is giving the power to the court. And Beth keeps looking at like, this is really not okay. I'll stop. Different day.
But this is all really, it does play into it because we're looking at what does the federal government have control over when it comes to guns? What does the state? What is the individual right? And I think, it comes down to, the person. And it really does. It depends on your view. And I think that, what I've come to realize because of our interaction with our colleague in Illinois, I don't feel threatened by guns. The threat that I have is from people. And I think that really has to do with how I feel about campus carry. I'm not going to change the way I am because people can have guns. Now, I might change the way I talk about or how I respond to something depending on the individual.
Well, thank y'all so much for joining us today. We really appreciate it. We'll be back next week with Officer Jackson,
yes.
Officer Maurice Jackson from the Amarillo College Police. And we're so excited to be able to visit with him. We've got a lot to talk about. He's a really fascinating man. So he's a cool dude.
Yeah, he is.
Anyway, Thank you so much for your time. Bye.
Well, bye.